The smell of freshly mowed grass drifted through the back door that morning, mixing with the bacon I had on the stove. It was a Saturday in late autumn, the kind of cool gray morning that Melbourne does so well, the sort of day that makes you want to stay in your dressing gown until noon. I had the radio on low, some old country station I'd been listening to for 30 years. And for a few minutes, standing there in my own kitchen with a cup of tea going cold on the bench, I felt genuinely content. That feeling didn't last long. I heard them before I saw them. Voices from upstairs, my son-in-law Kevin's low rumble, then my daughter Lynette's quick, defensive murmur. The familiar rhythm of a couple who've been arguing the same argument for so long they don't even bother finishing their sentences anymore. I turned the bacon down and waited. My name is Stewart. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, mostly on infrastructure projects around Victoria, before I retired 2 years ago. My wife Maureen passed away 4 years back, breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. After she died, the house felt enormous. 4 bedrooms, a double garage, a backyard that she used to fill with roses and vegetable beds that I had absolutely no idea how to maintain. I kept meaning to downsize. I kept not doing it. When Lynette called me 8 months after Maureen's funeral and said she and Kevin were struggling, really struggling, she said, with the rent in Footscray going up again, and Kevin between jobs and the baby on the way, I didn't hesitate. I told her to come home. Both of them. Of course, that's what you do. Lynette was 34 at the time. Kevin was 37. They'd been married 5 years. I liked Kevin well enough when they first got together. He was confident, funny in a self-deprecating way, good at fixing things around the house. He'd worked in project management for a construction company and made decent money. But somewhere in the 3 years before they moved in with me, something had shifted in him. The job went first, redundancy, he said, though I later found out he'd been let go for reasons nobody wanted to discuss openly. Then the freelance work he'd promised to pick up never quite materialized. He had a lot of plans. Kevin was excellent at plans. What he wasn't excellent at was following through on them. By the time they moved into my spare rooms, both of them, because they needed the second room for a nursery, I was covering their phone bills, their car registration, their private health insurance so Lynette could have the baby in a proper hospital. I bought the cot. I bought the change table. I bought a second-hand pram that Lynette found online, and Kevin said he'd go pick up, but somehow never got around to. So I drove to Dandenong myself on a Tuesday afternoon and loaded it into my boot. I told myself it was temporary. I told Maureen's photo on the mantelpiece it was temporary. My grandson was born on a Wednesday in March. They named him Theodore Teddy. They called him, and when the nurse put him in my arms that first evening in the hospital corridor, this tiny, red-faced, furious little person who smelled of something brand new, I understood completely why I'd done all of it. Every bill, every check, every trip to Dandenong. For a while after Teddy came home, things were actually all right. Lynette was tired in the way that new mothers are tired, hollowed out but fiercely, protectively happy. Kevin seemed energized by it too, at first. He'd walk Teddy in the pram around the neighborhood for hours. He learned how to swaddle properly before I did. I thought, watching him one evening in the kitchen with the baby on his chest while he stirred pasta one-handed, that maybe this was what he'd needed, something to anchor him. But by the time Teddy was 5 months old, the old patterns had crept back. Kevin started going out more. Not to job interviews, though. He'd mentioned those in passing, vaguely, without details. To catch up with mates, he'd say. To look at a potential business opportunity. To do some networking. He'd be gone by 9 in the morning and back after dinner. And when I asked how the day had gone, he'd say, yeah, good. Lots of promising stuff in the pipeline. And that would be the end of it. Lynette went back to part-time work when Teddy was 6 months old. She was a physiotherapist, good at her job, and her clinic was happy to have her back 2 days a week. I looked after Teddy on those days. I won't pretend that was a hardship. Those 2 days a week became the best part of my week, honestly. But I noticed that on the days I had Teddy, Kevin was rarely home either. Lynette would come back from work to find me with the baby and Kevin nowhere in the house, and she'd get this look on her face, not surprised, just tired in a different way than the baby tired, and she'd say, "Has he been home at all?" And I'd say he popped in around lunchtime even when he hadn't. I was covering for him. I don't know exactly when I started doing that. The bills kept coming. I'd set up a direct debit for their phone plan because Kevin kept forgetting to pay it and getting cut off. I was paying half the grocery bill. Lynette would hand me receipts, and I'd transfer money without either of us acknowledging what we were doing. Kevin drove my second car, the old Camry I'd kept after Maureen passed, because I couldn't bring myself to sell it yet, and I was covering the petrol and the registration and the insurance on that too. One evening in June, sitting at the kitchen table after Lynette had put Teddy to bed, I did the sums properly for the first time. I'd been avoiding it. The way you avoid getting on the scales when you know you've been eating badly. When I added it all up, not just the direct bills, but the groceries and the fuel, and the various things I'd quietly taken care of over the previous 18 months, it came to just over $42,000. I sat with that number for a long time. $42,000. And Kevin had not worked a single paying job in all that time. I didn't say anything that night. I poured myself a second glass of red, and I listened to the radio, and I thought about Maureen, who had always been the one in our marriage who could say difficult things to people she loved without it becoming a catastrophe. I was the engineer. I could build bridges. I was considerably less good at having conversations on them. The birthday party was my idea, actually. Teddy was turning 1 in March, and I suggested we do something proper, not a big affair. Just family and a few close friends. A nice lunch in the backyard. The roses that Maureen used to tend were gone, replaced by lawn. I couldn't be bothered pulling up, but the backyard was big and flat, and I bought some of those festoon lights from the hardware store, and Lynette helped me string them up the week before. We invited Lynette's cousin Faye and her husband, and a couple of Lynette's friends from her clinic, and Kevin's mate Bryce, who'd known him since school. Kevin's mother was supposed to come down from Bendigo but canceled the day before, a pattern I'd noticed with her as well, now that I thought about it. The day itself was beautiful. One of those rare Melbourne autumn days that decides to behave like summer warm. Still, the kind of light that makes everything look better than it is. Teddy was wearing a small linen shirt that Lynette had bought specially, and he was absolutely thrilled by all of it. The people and the noise, and the fact that someone had given him a balloon which he kept trying to eat. I was at the barbecue, doing sausages and some lamb chops, when I heard it. I wasn't meant to hear it. I'm certain of that. Kevin was standing with Bryce near the back fence, both of them with beers, and they were talking in the way that blokes talk when they think nobody's within earshot, comfortably loud, not bothering to lower their voices because it didn't occur to them that the old man at the barbecue might not be as deaf as he looked. "Honestly, mate," Kevin was saying, "the old bloke's got no idea. He just keeps handing over money like it grows on trees. I keep waiting for him to figure it out, but he hasn't yet." Bryce laughed, not a mean laugh, just a bloke laughing at something his mate said, not really thinking about it. "Yeah, but you can't keep that going forever." "Why not?" Kevin said. "He's lonely. He's got nothing else to do with it. And he's not going to kick his own daughter out." I turned a sausage. I kept my face completely neutral. I was very glad, in that moment, to have something to do with my hands. He's not going to kick his own daughter out. I replayed that sentence about 4 times while I finished the sausages. I thought about the $42,000. I thought about the Camry sitting in my driveway that Kevin drove every day. I thought about every receipt Lynette had handed me with her eyes slightly down, slightly ashamed, the way she always looked when she had to ask me for something. I thought about Maureen. I thought about what she would say. She would say, "Stu, you have been a complete and utter mug. And you need to stop now. I served the sausages. I smiled at Faye when she came over to say the lamb was perfect. I held Teddy while Lynette cut the cake, and he smashed his small fist into the icing with tremendous satisfaction, and everyone laughed. I did not say a single word about what I'd heard, but something had settled in me. The way concrete settles quietly, invisibly, and then it's solid, and there's nothing shifting it. The following Monday, I rang my accountant. I want to be precise about this, because I think the precision matters. I did not act out of anger. By the time I made that call, the anger had already passed through me and come out the other side as something quieter and more deliberate. What I told my accountant was simple. I wanted to remove Kevin from any accounts, direct debits, or financial arrangements that had his name or access attached to them. I wanted to review all the regular payments I'd set up over the past 18 months and identify which ones I was legally and practically able to cease. She rang me back that afternoon. There were 7 direct debits connected to Kevin or Lynette's accounts. The car insurance, the phone plans, both of them. It turned out I'd been paying Kevin's as well as Lynette's without quite registering it. A streaming service that Kevin had signed up for using my card details 18 months earlier and never mentioned. Grocery deliveries that went to the house, to an account in Kevin's name that I'd been topping up. 7 threads, and I'd been holding all of them. I didn't pull them all at once. I'm not a cruel man. I set a date the end of the following month, which gave them 6 weeks, and I wrote a letter. Not an email, an actual letter, printed and signed, which I put in an envelope and left on the kitchen bench one morning while they were both still asleep. The letter said, in plain language, that I was no longer in a financial position to continue supporting their household expenses, that the current arrangements would end on the 30th of the following month, that I loved my daughter and my grandson, and I would always be part of their lives, that the Camry would need to be returned to me, or an arrangement made for Kevin to take over the registration and insurance in his own name, that I hoped we could discuss this calmly as a family. I didn't mention what I'd overheard at the party. I'd thought about it and decided it didn't matter. What mattered was the 6 weeks. What they did with them was up to them. I drove to my mate Dennis's place that morning, and we spent the day fishing off his boat out near Mornington. I didn't catch much. It didn't matter. Lynette called me that evening while I was still on Dennis's boat. "Dad," she said. There was a long pause. "I'm really sorry." That wasn't what I'd expected her to say. I'd been bracing myself for upset, for accusations, for a version of events in which I was the problem. "What are you sorry about?" I said. "I've known for a while that Kevin hasn't been honest with you," she said. "About the job. About a lot of things. I kept telling myself it would sort itself out. Has it sorted itself out?" Another pause. I could hear Teddy babbling in the background, that cheerful nonsense sound he made when he was happy. "No," she said. "It hasn't." We talked for a long time that evening, sitting on Dennis's boat while the sun went down over Port Phillip Bay. Me and my daughter trying to find our way back to honesty after a year and a half of careful, expensive pretending. She told me things I'd half known and made myself not look at. Kevin hadn't been made redundant. He'd resigned after a dispute with management that had gotten out of hand, and the version he'd told Lynette had been cleaned up considerably from what actually happened. The freelance work had never existed. The business opportunities he was always chasing were mostly schemes that Bryce and various other mates had come up with over beers, none of which had ever progressed past a pub conversation. The money Kevin had saved before he stopped working, about $23,000, Lynette thought had gone. She didn't know exactly where. He hadn't told her. "I've been too scared to push it," she said. "I didn't want it to become real." "It's already real, love," I said. "It's been real for a while." Kevin did not call me. Not that evening. Not the next day. He avoided me in the house, with the practiced ease of someone who'd been avoiding things for a long time. I didn't push it. I'd said what I had to say in the letter. The 6 weeks were instructive. By the 3rd week, I noticed things changing. Lynette increased her hours at the clinic, went from 2 days to 4, arranged with one of her colleagues to do some home visit sessions on the weekends. She was exhausted, but there was a different quality to the exhaustion, more purposeful. She opened her own bank account and started having her salary go directly into it. Kevin picked up 3 weeks of work, laboring for a company that did driveways and paving. He came home those evenings filthy and sore, and it must be said, considerably less pleased with himself than usual. I made him a cup of tea once when he came in, and he said thanks Stu in a voice that had something genuine in it. First time in months, the Camry question he solved himself. Eventually. He came to me in week 5 and said his uncle in Ballarat had a work ute he could borrow for a few months, and he'd return my car. He said it straightforwardly. No performance. No attempt to renegotiate. I said that sounded fine. On the last day of the month, I sat down with Lynette properly, just the two of us. Kevin had taken Teddy to the park, and we talked about what came next. She said she'd been looking at townhouses to rent in Sunshine, about 20 minutes away. She and Kevin had had some hard conversations, she said. She didn't know if the marriage was going to work. That part was still unclear, but she knew she needed to be standing on her own feet, regardless of what happened with Kevin, and she'd realized she'd let that go for too long. I think I let you take care of everything, she said, because it felt safer than admitting that things were really wrong. I let you, I said. That's on both of us. She moved out 6 weeks after that. Kevin went with her. They were still trying, she said, seeing a counselor, taking it 1 week at a time. They took Teddy in the cot and the pram and most of what they'd accumulated over 18 months in my house, and I helped them load the van, and I didn't make it into anything more than what it was. The morning after they left, I stood in the kitchen with my tea and the radio on, and the house genuinely quiet for the first time in a long time. The spare rooms were empty. The backyard was still just lawn. No roses. The Camry was back in the garage. I rang a real estate agent that afternoon about the rose garden. Not a real estate agent, I rang a gardener. A woman named Susan who'd worked on a few houses in the street. And I asked her to come have a look at the backyard and tell me what we could do with it. She came the following Saturday and walked around for 10 minutes and then said, "Do you know what your wife planted here originally? Because the soil's actually very good. You could have it back to roses in 2 seasons if you wanted." I said yes. I think that's what I'd like. Lynette brings Teddy over every Sunday now. Kevin comes sometimes. It's still complicated. The way things often are when 2 people are trying to figure out if they can find their way back to each other. Some Sundays he's there and some he's not. On the Sundays he is there. He helps me in the garden without being asked, which I choose to read as something. Teddy has learned to walk in the months since they moved out. He walks the way toddlers do, with absolute commitment and absolutely no caution, just hurling himself forward on those small legs and trusting that the ground will be there. He spent most of last Sunday trying to reach the new rose seedlings we'd put in along the back fence. I keep thinking about what Kevin said at that birthday party. He's got nothing else to do with it. He was wrong about that. As it turns out, I have a grandson to watch grow up. I have a garden that needs working. I have Sunday mornings and Dennis's boat, and 30 years of knowledge about how things get built and what holds them together. I have enough. What I've come to understand, and it took me longer than it should have, I'll admit that plainly, is that love is not the same thing as an open wallet. I spent 18 months telling myself that financial support was how I showed up for my family because it was the easiest thing I knew how to give, and it meant I didn't have to have the harder conversations. But easy generosity, the kind that asks for nothing and notices nothing, doesn't actually help people grow. It helps them stay comfortable in situations they should be leaving. My daughter knew something was wrong for a long time before she did anything about it. I made it possible for her to wait. I'm not proud of that. If you're in a situation like mine, and from what people tell me in comments and messages, more of you are than I'd have guessed, I'd say this: There is a difference between supporting your family and funding their avoidance. One builds something. The other just delays a reckoning that will happen eventually, and usually at a higher cost. Set the boundary before the resentment poisons everything. Have the conversation while you still have the goodwill to have it kindly, and trust the people you love to be more capable than you've been giving them credit for. They usually are. Teddy's found the rose seedlings. He's got a fistful of mulch, and he's very pleased with himself. Some things are worth protecting. You just have to be clear-eyed enough to know which ones. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened over those 18 months. Long enough that the sting of it has settled into something more useful, not bitterness, just clarity. And I think the clearest thing I can say is this. What Kevin did wasn't unusual. People take what's freely offered and stop asking whether they should. That's not a character flaw unique to him. It's just what happens when there are no edges to push against. I was the one who removed all the edges. I told myself it was love, and part of it was. But part of it was also avoidance. My own avoidance of a hard conversation I didn't know how to start. Every direct debit I set up, every receipt I took from Lynette without comment, every time I covered for Kevin when he wasn't home, I was choosing the path that felt kind in the moment and cost me nothing immediately. I was an engineer for 30 years. I understood load-bearing structures better than most people, and yet I watched my own household slowly shift all its weight onto one beam and told myself it would be fine. It wasn't fine. And the longer I let it go, the heavier it got. What I've come to believe, and this isn't a formula, it's just what I've worked out from living it, is that the consequences of our choices don't arrive all at once. They accumulate quietly. Kevin's pattern of avoiding responsibility didn't start when he moved into my house. It started years before, probably. In 100 small moments where someone stepped in so he didn't have to face something. I was just the latest in a line of people who made it easy for him. And Lynette, who is genuinely a strong and capable woman, had learned somewhere along the way to wait for things to resolve themselves rather than forcing the moment. I'd watched that happen and enabled it because it was easier than saying, "Love, this isn't working." The tricky thing about integrity is that it asks you to act before it's comfortable to act. Not after everything falls apart. Not when you're so resentful that kindness is no longer possible. Before that point, when you still have enough goodwill to be honest without being cruel. I left it too long. I'll own that. But I also think there's something worth saying about resilience, about what people are actually capable of when you stop cushioning them from reality. Lynette went from 2 days a week to 4 within a month of receiving my letter. She opened her own account. She found a place to live. She made decisions she'd been putting off for over a year, and she made them quickly and well, because she had to. Kevin picked up a laboring job and came home dirty and tired and, eventually, a little more honest. Neither of those things would have happened if I'd kept going the way I was going. People are more capable than our protectiveness gives them credit for. Sometimes the most decent thing you can do for someone you love is to stop making things so easy. That's what I know now. Standing in a backyard that's starting to look like Maureen's again, watching my grandson try to pull up rose seedlings with absolute confidence that this is an excellent idea.